It is September 14th. We just wrapped up a great webinar program today. Most of the time on the webinar, we spent discussing the New York HERO Act and activation of your infectious control plans. As you know, the State Department of Health issued a declaration on September 6th, which then triggered the obligation on covered employers in the private sector to activate these plans. Concurrently, we've seen a number of questions from clients and friends of the firm with respect to this activation and implementation. And there being some gaps in terms of what guidance is provided under the statute and through the other materials that the state has published thus far. Some of those FAQs deal with questions of masking, right? Do we need to currently require employees to mask? Well, our read of the legislation and the guidance thus far, the short answer is yes, perhaps subject to some accommodation requirements and other considerations, but it appears clearly that we're back to that phase where employees are going to be required generally to wear masks at work. Also screening, do we need to screen our employees now, given the activation of the plan? And I think, again, the short answer there is yes, that screening is required. Under the law, the screening needs to conform with any state or federal guidance. Of course, we don't have any right now. So that leaves some questions for employers as to how to effectuate that screening. That's something that we're working with our clients on a daily basis, and we'd be happy to help you too. Stephanie, I know that's not the full list, far from it, of FAQs. What are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. We received lots of questions. One of the biggest ones is what this verbal review requirement entails. In our programming, we dived a little bit deeper into what that might mean. If you adopted a model plan, that lays out a verbal review / training almost synonymously, and it creates an obligation if you adopted the model plan to provide training that follows and covers that enumerated list of topics. So making sure that if you've adopted the model plan, that you're following that accordingly. We also briefly touched on the interplay between the OSHA emergency temporary standard that applies to healthcare workers and what that means with respect to the New York HERO Act. Ultimately, there is no blanket exception for healthcare industries. It's going to depend on whether an employer or their employees are covered by the OSHA emergency temporary standard. If they are covered by an OSHA standard, then the OSHA standard will apply. But if they are not, or if the OSHA standard expires, then the New York HERO Act would apply, which does create a situation where certain employers may have certain employees who are covered by the OSHA standard and others who are not. Therefore, you may have both that are at play. I think those are a couple of the big ones that we covered, Andy, unless you have any others that you think are worth noting.
No, I think that's great. I would just remind people that we do publish the webinars. You'll have a link to that in this message that you can access it. And we also published a detailed article that Stephanie and I wrote with these FAQs on compliance to the HERO Act. You can get that at the New York Labor and Employment Law Report. And you can link to that from our website at bsk.com. So thank you, Stephanie, for tracking these things so closely, and good luck to everybody out there.